The moment the Vampire King's silver eyes landed on her, Olivia Mercer knew her life would never be the same. She had not wanted to be there. Nobody had warned her that accepting a waitressing shift at the Haverstone estate meant walking into the most terrifying room she had ever encountered in her 23 years of life. Her agency had described it as a private dinner service for a wealthy European family with old money tastes. Old money was one way to put it, old as in centuries, old as in the kind of old that made the marble floors groan with memory and the candlelit chandeliers drip wax that smelled faintly of iron. Olivia had arrived at the address given to her. A door set into a stone wall in the middle of Manhattan's financial district that should not have existed, that no GPS could locate, and that opened onto a staircase descending 3 floors underground into a hall, so grand it made the Metropolitan Museum look like a waiting room. She had almost turned back. Almost. But she needed the money, and the agency had promised triple her usual rate, and sometimes desperation is its own kind of courage. Now she stood in the far corner of the great hall, tray in hand, dressed in the black and white uniform she'd been handed at the door, watching approximately 40 beings who were absolutely, definitively not human glide around one another with the predatory grace of wolves, pretending to be swans. They were beautiful, unbearably, terrifyingly beautiful. Their skin was white as new snow, their hair ranging from platinum to silver to the purest frost white she had ever seen, and their eyes held colors that had no natural precedent. Mercury gray, violet black, amber so bright it looked molten. They wore suits and gowns that were contemporary in cut but something else in presence, as though even their clothing remembered an older era. They moved too smoothly, blinked too infrequently, and when they laughed, the sound was like glass breaking at a frequency too precise to cause pain but impossible to ignore. Olivia kept her tray level, kept her eyes down, and told herself not to shake. "You there," said a woman in a deep burgundy gown, who materialized beside her without any perceivable transit from one point to the next. "Keep to the edges. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not make eye contact with anyone seated at the high table, and for the love of all old blood, do not spill anything." "Yes, madam," Olivia said quietly. The woman leaned in close enough that Olivia felt the absence of body heat that should have been there. "You are human," she said, not accusatorially, more like she was noting the weather. "Stay small, stay forgettable. You will survive the evening." It was not the most comforting professional briefing Olivia had ever received. She drifted along the edges of the hall, refilling glasses with a blood-red wine that she had already decided to never look at too closely, collecting empty crystal flutes and keeping her breathing even. The conversations around her were in multiple languages. She caught French, something Slavic, what might have been medieval Latin, and occasionally in English, though those conversations were the ones she least wanted to hear. Talk of territories, talk of bloodlines, talk of laws that she was fairly certain predated modern government by several hundred years. Then the hall went quiet, not gradually. All at once, as though someone had pressed a universal mute button, and every being in the room obeyed it. Olivia looked up without meaning to. He walked in from the far archway, and the word "walked" was almost insufficient. He moved like gravity, had opinions about him specifically. He was tall, genuinely tall, not the kind of tall that registers and is forgotten, but the kind that restructures the architecture of any room he enters. His hair was white as winter moonlight and fell to his jaw in clean, deliberate lines. His skin was the same marble, pale as everyone else in the room. But on him it looked less like a condition, and more like an aesthetic choice made by something ancient and deliberate. He wore a black suit that cost more than Olivia's yearly rent, and he wore it with the absolute indifference of someone who has never once had to think about what he puts on. His eyes, when they swept the room, were the color of a winter storm, grey so deep it bordered on silver, and so utterly alert that Olivia felt, for one hallucinatory second, that he could see every thought she'd had since she walked in the door. "Lord Casimir Vale," murmured a vampire near Olivia, low and reverent, the way you say a prayer or a warning. Casimir Vale, king of the Umbral court, the last sovereign of an unbroken line stretching back to a time when Rome was still burning, moved to the head of the high table and did not sit. He stood, and the room waited. "We are convened," he said, and his voice was quiet, but it did not need to be loud. It was the kind of voice that moved through walls. "The court has waited 3 years for this evening. I will not delay it further." Olivia pressed herself closer to the wall. A man at the high table, older looking even than the others, with a ridge of silver at his collar and the manner of a judge who had sentenced people to death for minor offences, rose and inclined his head. "Lord Casimir, the law requires it be said formally. The umbral court is incomplete without a queen. The bloodlines demand continuity. The other courts will not recognize your authority indefinitely without a consort to solidify the succession. This is not a choice. This is a law written in the old tongue before either of us can remember." "I remember it perfectly well, Councillor Aldrich," Casimir said, and there was the faintest edge of something in his voice that made even Aldrich settle back slightly. "I wrote half of it." A murmur moved through the room. "Then you understand," said a woman at the far end of the table. Silver-haired, poised, wearing an expression like a knife wrapped in silk, that the court has the right to compel the selection if the king refuses to make one. Tonight is the night appointed. We have gathered the eligible bloodlines. Lady Seraphine of the Eastern Reaches, Lady Morrigan of the Iron Court, Lady Thessaly of the— "I know who is in the room," Casimir said. The silence that followed was different from the first one. This one had weight. Casimir turned, slowly, and his gaze moved through the assembled court with the deliberate patience of someone who has never once been rushed by anything and never intended to start. He looked past the women who had been introduced, past the councillors, past the crowd of gathered vampires in their finery. His eyes landed on Olivia. She stopped breathing. He looked at her the way you look at something you recognize but cannot immediately place, not with hunger, not with calculation, with something quieter and stranger, something that looked, absurdly, like relief. "Her," he said. The room erupted, not loudly. These were creatures too composed for shrieking. But the eruption of voices was immediate and layered and furious, protests overlapping in 4 languages, the councillors rising from their seats, the 3 titled ladies stiffening with identical, aristocratic outrage. Councillor Aldrich's voice rose above the rest. "My lord, that is a human girl." "I'm aware," Casimir said. "She is a servant. I can see that." "The law stipulates." "The law," Casimir said, and this time the edge in his voice was not faint at all, "stipulates that I must choose. It does not stipulate that I must choose from the selection you have prepared for me." He turned to look at Aldrich directly. "Does it?" Aldrich's jaw tightened. "It stipulates a queen capable of upholding the court. A queen of sufficient standing." "Show me where standing is defined as vampiric," Casimir said. "Show me the exact clause. I'll wait." No one spoke. Olivia, meanwhile, was having what could only be described as a very quiet, very internal crisis. She had not moved. Her tray was still level. Her hands had not shaken. But every single cell in her body was firing distress signals simultaneously, and the rational portion of her mind, the portion that had gotten her through 3 jobs, a bad year, and a city that chewed people up, was very calmly pointing out that she had several options right now. She could set the tray down and run. She could faint. She could keep standing very still and see what happened next. She chose the third option because it was the only one that seemed to carry any possibility of surviving the next 60 seconds. Casimir crossed the room toward her, and the crowd parted. Not dramatically, but inevitably, the way water parts around something it has no choice but to yield to. He stopped 3 feet from her. Up close, he was even more striking in that particular way, that things made of cold and silver and old darkness tend to be. His eyes held hers without demand, just presence, pure, enormous presence. "What's your name?" he asked, and his voice at this proximity was lower and different from the declarative tone he'd used with the room. "Olivia," she said, and was genuinely impressed that her own voice came out steady. Olivia Mercer," he repeated, and her name sounded different in his mouth, like it had been placed in a room with better acoustics. "I owe you an explanation, but not here. I think," she said carefully, "that I'm going to need a much bigger explanation than you might think." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth, not a full expression, just the beginning of one. "I know," he said. "Will you trust me for the next hour?" Behind him, the councillors were already arguing. The three ladies had settled into the kind of cold fury that doesn't raise its voice because it's planning something worse. The assembled court watched with the hungry fascination of an audience at a very high-stakes theatre production. Olivia thought about her rent, about the waitressing shift she'd agreed to, about the fact that she was standing in an underground vampire throne room, being asked to trust a man who had just announced her to his entire court as his intended queen. 1 hour, she said. Then I want answers. Agreed, Casimir said. He did not offer her his hand. He simply turned and walked back toward the high table, and there was an unspoken expectation in the way he moved that she would follow. She did, though she set her tray on a side table first, because she had enough presence of mind to not walk into a political vampire confrontation carrying a tray of blood wine. She stood beside him at the head of the hall while Councillor Aldrich sputtered through the formal objections, and the senior members of the court demanded clarification. And Lady Morrigan said, in a voice like winter flowers, that this was an insult to every titled house in the umbral court. Casimir answered each objection with the particular calm of someone who has survived wars and found committee meetings tedious by comparison. He did not raise his voice. He did not explain himself beyond what was legally required. And every time someone tried to speak around Olivia as though she were furniture, his eyes tracked to them with an attention so sharp that they invariably redirected their address. When Aldrich finally said, "The human girl cannot possibly understand what she's being asked to step into," Casimir turned to Olivia and waited. "He's right," she said, meeting Aldrich's gaze. "I don't, but you're talking about me, so I think I should be part of the conversation." Aldrich stared at her the way you stare at a piece of furniture that has just expressed an opinion. "She is part of the conversation," Casimir said, and there was finality in it like a key turning in a lock. The formal session dissolved eventually into something more like a very tense cocktail party, during which various vampires circled Olivia at careful distances, and Casimir stayed within arm's reach of her for the duration. She noticed that he never drifted more than a few feet, that when someone approached her too quickly, his attention sharpened and the approaching party invariably slowed. He said very little during these encounters. He didn't need to. His presence said everything. It was past midnight by the time he led her out of the main hall through a side passage and into a room that was smaller, quieter, panelled in dark wood and lit by a fireplace that looked like it had been burning for a century. He poured her a glass of actual wine, regular wine, she noted with relief, and set it on the table near her without ceremony. "Sit down," he said, not rudely. Just with the directness of someone who has observed that she has been standing and professionally rigid for the last several hours. She sat. She wrapped both hands around the glass. He sat across from her and regarded her with those storm-grey eyes. "You're really going to explain this," she said. "Not a question. A requirement." "Yes," he said. "From the beginning or from the relevant part?" "Both." He almost smiled again. "The court has been demanding I take a queen for 3 years. The law is genuine. It predates the written versions by several centuries. A sovereign without a consort is considered unstable. Weak. It invites challenges from rival courts and from within my own council. I have resisted because every candidate the court has presented me with is politically motivated. They want the position, not the partnership." "And you want a partnership," she said. "I want someone who will not maneuver against me before the first year is out," he said. "Someone who does not already have an alliance with one of the 3 houses currently contesting my eastern border." He paused. "I have been watching you since you arrived this evening. That's a little unsettling." "I know. But I watched because you were different from every other person in the room. You were afraid, and you stayed anyway. You kept your composure when composure was genuinely difficult. And when I looked at you, you looked back." He said that last part simply, as though it explained more than it appeared to. "Most people don't look back," she guessed. "In my world, no," he said. "They look away. Or they look with hunger for the position I represent. You looked at me like you were trying to understand me. I have not encountered that in a very long time." Olivia was quiet for a moment, listening to the fire. "You understand what you're actually asking me, right? You're not asking me to dinner. You're asking me to be the queen of a vampire court. I'm a human. I waitress. I have a studio apartment in Brooklyn and a cat named Gerald. I know, he said, and there was no condescension in it, just acknowledgement. So why me specifically? You could have pointed to anyone. I could have, he agreed, but the choice would have been false, and I am many things, Olivia Mercer, but I am not a liar. His eyes held hers. And I found, when the moment came, that I did not want to point to anyone else. The silence that followed that statement had a different quality from all the silences that had come before it. I'm not agreeing to anything, she said. I want to be clear about that. You've had 1 hour and I'm spending it getting information, not making decisions. Fair, he said. Tell me what this actually means, all of it. Not the diplomatic version. And so he told her. He told her that a queen of the umbral court was not a ceremonial position. It was a seat with genuine power, equal in weight to the king's in all matters of court law. He told her that accepting it would mean a formal binding, a ritual that connected the queen's life force to the court's wellspring, which would extend her natural lifespan significantly. Centuries, if she chose to remain human, or indefinitely if she chose the full transition. He told her that she would have enemies from the moment it was announced, that the 3 ladies in the hall alone represented houses with resources and histories of political violence. He told her that he could protect her, and said it not as a promise easily given, but as a statement of capability, with the particular confidence of someone who has never doubted his own power and has had 300 years to justify that certainty. That's the practical part, she said when he finished. What's the personal part? He looked at her for a long moment. The personal part, he said slowly, is that I have been running this court alone for longer than your country has existed. And tonight is the first time in a very long while that I have sat across from someone and felt something other than calculation. What did you feel? She asked, and her voice was quieter now. Curious, he said, genuinely curious, about who you are. It was not a declaration, it was not a sweep her off her feet romantic pronouncement. It was honest, and honest, she had learned, was much rarer than romantic. I need time, she said. I know. Real time. Not 1 hour. The court will push for a formal announcement within the week, he said, but that is a political constraint, not a personal one. We can, within certain limits, move at whatever pace you require. And what happens to me if I say no? He looked at her steadily. You go home tonight, with your memory of this place intact, because I will not take that from you without your consent, and you return to your life. The court forgets you. I cannot guarantee you forget us, but that is not my decision to make for you. She stared at him. You'd let me just leave. You are not mine to keep, he said, not unless you choose to be. Olivia took a slow breath and finished the wine. She set the glass down. She stood up. He rose when she did, automatic, old-fashioned, and somehow not irritating. I'll come back tomorrow night, she said, here, same time. And I want to talk more, not to decide, to understand. I'll be here, he said. She went home to Gerald the cat, sat on her kitchen floor at 2 in the morning, and stared at the ceiling for a very long time. She came back the next night, and the night after that. Over the following 2 weeks, she and Casimir developed something that could only be described as a very unusual courtship, conducted in the quieter rooms of the umbral court's underground estate, while the political machinery of the vampire world ground on around them. He showed her the court not from the grand hall but from the library, room after room of it, stretching through passageways carved from Manhattan's bedrock, shelves full of books in languages she couldn't read alongside histories written in English that read stranger than any fiction she had encountered. He told her about the courts, the umbral, the iron, the eastern reaches, the pale assembly, their alliances and feuds, the interlocking laws that governed vampire society, the blood codes that predated written language. She told him about Brooklyn, about growing up with a mother who worked doubles at a hospital and a father who had left when she was 9 and left behind only a decent record collection and a talent for disappearing. About dropping out of a literature degree when the money ran out. About the jobs, 3 of them simultaneously for the last 2 years. About the fact that she read more than anyone she knew because books had always been free from the library, and she had always been looking for worlds larger than the one she'd been given. He listened the way someone listens who has been in rooms full of noise for centuries and found genuine quiet a thing worth paying attention to. On the fifth night, they were in the library and she was reading an account of the founding of the Umbral Court. Written in 1347, translated into English by Casimir himself in 1889, she noted with a quiet jolt when she looked up and found him watching her. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said. "Yes. Have you ever been in love? Before, I mean, in all that time." He was quiet for a moment. The fire in the library grate was the only sound. "Once," he said. 4 centuries ago. She was one of the court ladies. It was real, I think, though I have wondered since whether it was genuine feeling or whether I was young enough, even by our standards, to confuse certainty with emotion. What happened? She chose alliance over partnership. She made an agreement with the Iron Court behind my back and nearly cost me the eastern border that I spent 40 years securing. He paused. She survived. I let her leave the court. I did not hate her for it, but I stopped believing that what I had felt was what I had believed it to be. "So you've been alone since the 1600s, Olivia said. "Give or take, that's an extraordinary amount of alone." "I had the court," he said. "Courts are noisy. They can approximate company. That's not the same thing." "No," he agreed, "it is not." She set the book down and looked at him. The firelight was making his hair catch silver and warm at once. "I'm not afraid of you," she said. "I was, the first night, but I'm not now." "I know," he said. "I noticed." "Does that bother you, that I'm not scared?" "No," he said, and the word landed with a weight she felt behind her sternum. "It is the most extraordinary thing anyone has given me in 400 years. On the 7th night, Councillor Aldrich appeared. Not in the library, but at the entrance to the estate, and he brought with him 2 other senior members of the council and a formal written notice that the law required a public announcement no later than 14 days from the selection. Casimir read the notice, folded it precisely, and handed it back. "The announcement will be made when I determine it should be made," he said. "My lord," Aldrich said, and his eyes slid to Olivia with undisguised disapproval. "The other courts are already hearing rumours. Lady Morrigan's house has sent 3 formal inquiries. The Pale Assembly has requested a meeting. The court cannot be seen to be." Aldrich. Casimir's voice was entirely calm and entirely final. "I am not interested in what the court can be seen to be. I am interested in what is right. Go back to the council and tell them the announcement will come." Aldrich left, but his expression, as he went, carried the shape of a threat deferred rather than abandoned. "He's going to cause trouble," Olivia said when they were alone. "Yes," Casimir said. "How much trouble? The kind that requires preparation." He looked at her. "I need to ask you something." "Okay. What is your answer?" She had known this question was coming, had been living alongside it for days, turning it over the way you turn over a stone to see what lives beneath it. She had called her friend Priya twice and found she could not explain any of it. She had sat with Gerald for long hours in her apartment, weighing the life she knew against something that felt massive and terrifying and more genuinely alive than anything she had encountered in 23 years. "I have conditions," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, but attention, sharp and full. "My friend Priya, she needs to know I'm safe. She doesn't need details, but she needs contact." "Manage carefully, yes," he said. "I keep my apartment for as long as I want it. I need something that's mine. Yes, I am not a political prop. If I am consulted on court matters, my opinion is taken seriously. Not performed at." "Yes," he said, and this time there was the beginning of that expression she was starting to recognize, the one that wasn't quite a smile, but was warmer than anything else she saw on his face. "And I want to understand how the binding works, all of it, before I agree to it." "I will explain every element," he said, "as many times as you need." "Then," she said, and took a breath. "Yes." The pause that followed felt enormous. He looked at her with those winter storm eyes, and something moved behind them that she was only just beginning to learn to read. "Olivia Mercer," he said quietly, "you are the most remarkable human being I have encountered in 3 centuries of encountering human beings." "You should meet more of us," she said. "We're very interesting," he laughed. A real laugh, brief and genuine and startled out of him, and it made the whole room feel different. The formal announcement was made 2 nights later in the grand hall with the full court assembled. Casimir stood at the high table with Olivia beside him. She had been given clothes that were appropriate to the setting, a deep midnight blue gown that she felt simultaneous awe and self-consciousness wearing, and he made the declaration in the old tongue first, which she couldn't understand, and then in English, clearly and without apology. Olivia Mercer is named consort-elect of the Umbral Court. The selection is made freely and without compulsion. The formal binding will be conducted at the new moon. This is not subject to council review. Lady Morrigan said, in the silence that followed, "You are making a mistake that the court will spend decades paying for." "Lady Morrigan," Casimir said, looking at her with an attention that made even that collected, beautiful, ancient vampire go very still. "You have made your objections known. They have been heard and considered and rejected. You are welcome to remain part of this court, or you are welcome to remove yourself to your house in the eastern reaches. Those are the choices available to you." Lady Morrigan said nothing else. But her eyes found Olivia's, and what lived in them was not the political fury she'd shown before. It was something older and harder than that. The days between the announcement and the new moon were the most complicated of Olivia's life, and her life had contained some genuinely complicated days. She had a security detail she hadn't asked for, 2 vampires, Luca and Riven, who appeared at her apartment building in Brooklyn with the uncomfortable efficiency of people who are very good at a job they have done for a long time. They were not unkind. They were simply there, present at a distance that was close enough to intervene and far enough to allow her to breathe. Casimir came to Brooklyn on the 3rd day. He stood in her apartment, which looked, she was very aware, somewhat different from the underground estate, and looked around at the shelves of library books and the cat hair on the furniture and the dead plants she kept meaning to throw away, and she watched him take all of it in. "Gerald," she said, because the cat had materialized and was staring at Casimir with the imperial assessment that cats reserve for people they haven't decided about yet. Casimir crouched down, full vampire lord, immaculate suit, 300 years of authority, and extended one hand toward the cat. Gerald sniffed it, considered, head-butted it. "He likes you," Olivia said, genuinely surprised. "Animals often do," Casimir said. "They are less concerned with what I am and more concerned with what I intend." "What do you intend?" she asked. He stood and looked at her, and the apartment was very small and very quiet around them. "To keep you safe," he said, "to build something I have not had in a very long time. 2. He paused, and she saw him choose his words with more care than usual. "To know you. Properly. Over time." "That's a very patient answer." "I have learned patience," he said, out of necessity. "I am working on meaning it." She made tea, regular tea, on her regular kettle, which she was grimly delighted to note he consumed without complaint, and they sat at her kitchen table while Gerald supervised from a chair, and she showed him the books she'd taken from the library downstairs, and he told her which ones were accurate and which ones were the work of someone who had been drunk while writing. It was the most normal thing she had done in 2 weeks. It was also, she realized while it was happening, the best conversation she'd had in years. The trouble arrived 4 days before the new moon in the form of Lady Morrigan, who had apparently decided that removing herself to the eastern reaches was an insufficient response to the situation. Olivia was leaving a coffee shop 2 blocks from her apartment when it happened. She was alone. Luca had gone to get the car. Riven was 15 feet behind her, when she stepped around the corner and found 2 vampires blocking the path. They were not from the Umbral Court. She could tell, not by anything she could articulate yet, but by something in the way they stood that was different from the vampires she'd been around for the past weeks. Colder, less controlled. Riven was there in under a second, stepping between her and them with a speed that she felt as wind, saying something in the old tongue that was clearly the vampire equivalent of a very serious warning. Olivia put her back against the building and watched, heart hammering, as Riven held 2 strangers at a standoff that lasted approximately 90 seconds before they retreated. Not because Riven overpowered them. Because someone behind Olivia said very quietly, one word that she didn't understand but that made both strangers go the particular color that very pale things go when they are frightened. Casimir. He had arrived without sound. He was in a dark coat, hands in his pockets, white hair catching the streetlight, and he was looking at the two retreating vampires with an expression that was not angry. It was something beyond anger, something that had the temperature of deep space, absolute zero, absolutely certain. When they were gone, he turned to Olivia. "Are you hurt?" he asked, and his voice for the first time had an edge she recognized as genuine worry. "No," she said, "I'm fine." Who were they? Morrigan's people, he said, and said it with a flatness that told her he had already known this was coming and was furious with himself for not preventing it sooner. "She sent people to frighten you," he said, "into withdrawing. If you withdrew voluntarily, the selection would be void and the council would be required to begin again." He was looking at her with an intensity that had something private in it. "Are you reconsidering?" "No," she said, and surprised herself with how quickly and certainly the word came out. "No, I'm not reconsidering. But I would like to know what we're doing about Morrigan." Something in his face settled. "I have been thinking about that," he said. "Walk with me." They walked, which she suspected was partly for her benefit. She needed to move, and he seemed to understand that. Through the nighttime streets of Lower Manhattan, and he talked through what he knew of Morrigan's position. She was not technically in violation of any court law yet. Frightening a human was not in itself a punishable offense under current code, because current code had not anticipated a human being in this particular position. "Then we changed the code," Olivia said. He looked at her. "If I'm going to be on the council in any real capacity," she said, "then human consorts should have protected status, specifically and explicitly. You said court law can be revised." "It can," he said slowly. "With the council's endorsement. Do you have enough council members who will endorse it to outvote Aldrich and whoever sides with him?" He considered. Possibly. With the right framing. "Frame it as precedent protection," she said. "Not just for me. For any future consort of any lineage. Make it broader than me, and you take away the argument that it's personal favoritism." He stared at her for a moment in the way that she was starting to recognize as the expression that appeared when she did something he hadn't anticipated, and he was recalibrating. "You studied law," he said. "I studied literature," she said. "But I read everything. Including case law, because I was bored one winter and the library had the whole set." "Remarkable," he said, and it wasn't flattery. It was a genuine assessment, the kind you make when you encounter something that consistently exceeds your expectations. The council session happened the following night. Casimir brought the proposal with the framing Olivia had suggested, and she sat in the room, at the table, not along the wall, and watched him work the council with the particular skill of someone who has been doing exactly this for 300 years. He let the senior members feel the logic of it before he applied any pressure. He answered Aldrich's objections directly and without heat. And when it came to a vote, the measure passed by 4-2, with Aldrich and one ally dissenting. The protected status was written into the code. It was real, it had legal weight. Morrigan, when she received the formal notice, sent back nothing. Her silence was its own communication, and Casimir read it as a retreat rather than a concession. He did not celebrate. He simply moved to the next matter on the list of things that needed handling before the new moon, and Olivia watched him work and thought about how strange it was to watch someone govern something. Actually govern it, with genuine attention and consequence, and find it compelling rather than tedious. She also thought about the way his expression had changed when he'd seen her on that street corner. The worry that had been in his eyes, unguarded for the fraction of a second before he'd controlled it back to competence. He was careful with her. She had noticed that from the beginning, the way he chose his words, the way he moved, the way he explained things, without assuming she would understand less than she did, but also without assuming she would understand more than she had been told. He was careful in the way of someone who understands that carelessness is a form of damage and who has seen enough damage to be determined about the alternative. On the night before the new moon, he came to the library where she was sitting with the book, and he sat across from her, and he said, "I want to ask you something, without the political context, just between us." She put the book down. "Are you happy?" he asked. "Not with the decision, not with the binding or the court or the title. With this," he gestured between them, "with the version of this that is just the two of us in a room." She thought about it honestly, because he deserved that. Yes, she said, which is terrifying, because a month ago I would have told you that my life was fine. It was survivable. I had things I cared about, but I would have been lying about the fine part. She looked at him across the table. I am more alive right now in the middle of all of this chaos and danger and complete upheaval than I have been in years, and a significant part of that is you specifically. Me specifically, he echoed quietly. You listen, she said. You actually listen. You talk to me like I have things worth saying, and you keep showing up, which... She stopped. Started again. Showing up is not a small thing. I grew up with someone who was very good at not showing up, so it matters to me. He was very still. I understand that kind of absence, he said. My own court has spent 3 centuries creating the appearance of loyalty without the substance of it. I know what it is to be surrounded by people who are there for reasons that have nothing to do with you. So we're both fairly terrible at this, she said. At intimacy, he said. At trusting it, she said. At believing it won't be pulled out from under us. Yes, he said. That is the accurate word for it. A pause. I believe it this time. I do too, she said, which is the terrifying part. The silence was the warm kind. The fire went on doing its job. Gerald, who had been installed in the library for the evening and was currently occupying a velvet chair that had probably survived 2 world wars, snored quietly. Casimir, she said. Yes, after tomorrow, what does an actual day look like? For us, not a political day, an actual one. He thought about it with the same seriousness he brought to everything. You would sleep during the day, he said. I cannot join you in that, but I can be present in the building. In the evening, we would have time. To talk, to work, to be in a room together without agenda. The court requires attendance approximately 3 nights in 7. The other nights are ours. And Gerald? Gerald is, clearly, part of the household. Obviously, she said. I have never had a cat, he said, with the expression of someone encountering an entirely new variable. Gerald will fix that, she said. He looked over at Gerald, who had one paw stretched out in deep, luxurious sleep. I look forward to it, Casimir said, and meant it. The binding ceremony happened at midnight on the new moon, in the oldest chamber of the estate, a room so deep beneath the city that Olivia could feel the weight of Manhattan above her like a held breath. The room itself was beautiful in the way of things that have never been designed for beauty and have achieved it anyway. Raw stone walls, floor covered in silver symbols she now recognized as the old tongue, candles that burned in colors she hadn't known candles could be. The umbral court was assembled, all 40 of them in their finest. Even Aldrich was present, maintaining his silence with the stiff composure of someone honoring the law they disagree with, which was, she thought, at least something. Casimir stood across from her, white hair loose for the first time she had seen, falling past his jaw, wearing formal court robes in deep black with silver at the edges that made him look like something out of a painting that belonged in a museum. He looked at her across the chamber and she looked back and she thought, I am doing this. I am genuinely doing this. The officiating elder, an ancient vampire named Thessalonius, so old he made the others look young, with a voice like gravel and a gentleness that surprised her, conducted the ceremony in the old tongue, and Casimir translated each portion in a low murmur meant only for her. The questions were asked. The responses were given. The binding was not painful, which she had been quietly afraid of. It felt like warmth moving through her, a settling sensation, as though something that had been slightly out of alignment had found its proper place. When it was done, Thessalonius said, in English, the binding is complete. The umbral court has its queen. The assembled court was very quiet. Then, starting from somewhere in the middle and spreading outward, they bowed. Not a court ceremony bow, but something deeper and older, the kind of bow that means we recognize you, we will not unmake this. Even Aldrich, after a pause that lasted precisely as long as his pride would allow, inclined his head. Casimir held out his hand to her for the first time, actually offered it, palm up, waiting. She took it. His fingers closed around hers, and she felt the warmth of the binding between them, faint and steady like a pulse. How do you feel? He asked, and she heard the genuine question beneath the formal one. Like myself, she said. Just myself, but here. That is exactly right, he said. The reception that followed was formal and lengthy, and by vampire standards probably quite restrained, but Olivia got through it with her composure intact, and several genuine conversations with members of the court who came to her directly, not through Casimir, but to her, with the intention of assessing who she was rather than what she represented. A vampire named Isolde, silver-haired and sharp-minded, and apparently one of the court scholars, spent 20 minutes talking with her about the library and left seeming genuinely pleased with what she'd found. A young-looking vampire named Darian, who turned out to be the court's youngest member, at a mere 130 years, admitted that he had voted for the protected status measure and thought it was long overdue. Morrigan did not attend. That was fine. That was in its way, its own kind of answer. At 2 a.m, Kazema brought her a glass of champagne. Actual champagne, her request, which he had arranged without comment, and stood beside her near the window of the great hall, which looked out through some architectural impossibility at the Manhattan skyline reflected in a ceiling of dark stone. "She's not going to stop," Olivia said, because she had been thinking about Morrigan throughout the evening, and she was not someone who put problems on a shelf and hoped they resolved themselves. "No," Casimir agreed. "She will work within the law now, because the protected status changes her calculus. But she will look for other angles, political angles. Challenges to the binding's validity. Questions about the succession, if we have no heir of any kind, which in our terms means a chosen successor, not necessarily a child. She will work the eastern reaches against us if she can," he considered. "She is not my primary concern." "What is?" "You," he said simply. "Making sure you have what you need to do this well and not lose yourself in the process." She looked at him. "That's a very careful thing to worry about." "You told me that showing up matters," he said. "I intend to show up for all of it, including the parts that are difficult." She felt something move through her that was warmer than the binding, older and simpler, the kind of feeling that doesn't have a complex name, because its name is just safety, just being seen, just this. "Tell me something," she said. "Yes, the first night. When you looked across the room and pointed at me." She watched his face. "Was it really because I looked back at you?" He was quiet for a moment. "Partly," he said. "But there is another part." He looked out at the skyline. "I have walked into that hall for 60 years of court sessions, every one of them the same. The same faces, the same politics, the same performance of hierarchy. And then I walked in and saw you standing in the corner, and you were so." He paused. "So present, so entirely yourself, in a room designed to make everyone else perform a version of themselves. I thought, there is someone who is real. You could tell all of that from across a room?" "I have spent 3 centuries reading rooms," he said. "I am very good at it." "You picked a human waitress to be your queen because she seemed real," she said, and she could hear the laughter in her own voice. "When you say it like that, it sounds impulsive," he said, and there was the expression, the almost smile, closer to the surface now than it had ever been, warmer. "It was a little impulsive," she said. "Possibly the most impulsive thing I have done since the 17th century, he agreed, and this time he did smile, fully and actually, and it transformed Facer in the way that full smiles always transform faces that are usually guarded. It made him look younger and more real and more like someone she could love. She realized, standing there, that she was already at the beginning of loving him. Not the complete version, that would take time. And she understood that. But the beginning, the part where the shape of someone starts to become necessary to the architecture of your day, where you find yourself looking forward to their voice, where safety and warmth and genuine interest have combined into something that has a direction, and that direction is toward them. She reached out and took his hand, unprompted, and felt his fingers close around hers with the same steadiness as before. In the weeks that followed, the umbral court began to change, slowly and without announcement, the way things change when a genuine variable has been introduced into a system that has been static for too long. Olivia attended council sessions and asked questions that the council was not accustomed to being asked, practical questions about enforcement and resource distribution, and the welfare of the younger court members, who turned out to have a set of concerns that the senior council had been systematically ignoring, because senior councils everywhere, tend to do that. Isolde, who had become something approaching a friend, helped her navigate the political landscape with the patience of someone who had been navigating it for 4 centuries and found a student worth teaching. Casimir watched her work with an attention that never felt like surveillance and always felt like interest. He consulted her on matters he had previously handled alone, not to defer his authority, but because he genuinely wanted her perspective, and she genuinely gave it, sometimes agreeing with his instincts, sometimes pushing back, and both of those things were, she realized, what he had been looking for all along. Not a mirror, not a prop, a person. Morrigan made her move 6 weeks after the binding, as Casimir had predicted. She brought a formal challenge before the Pale Assembly, the intercourt governing body, on the grounds that a human queen constituted a violation of ancient blood law. The case was well constructed. Olivia read the filing herself and could see the architecture of it, the way it used genuine historical precedent to build toward a contemporary conclusion. She has a point, Olivia told Casimir, sitting at the library table with the filing in front of her. Not a winning one, but a real one. There's no explicit precedent for a human consort. No, he said, so we need to make one. She tapped the document. The argument she's not making, the one that defeats her, is that the original blood law was written to protect the court from consorts who might betray its interests to a rival court. A human with no court allegiance is actually in better compliance with the spirit of that law than any of the 3 candidates she was backing, who all had existing allegiances. Casimir looked at her. Write that argument, she said. File it with the Pale Assembly before her case is scheduled. Frame the entire thing as the blood law working exactly as intended. You want to win this on her own terms, he said. I want to win this in a way that closes the argument permanently, she said. Win it on the technicalities, and she'll find another angle. Win it on the principle, and there's nothing left to challenge. He was quiet for a moment. You are extraordinary, he said. I am practical, she said. It's different. Not to me, he said. The case before the Pale Assembly took 3 weeks to resolve. Casimir filed the counter-argument. The Assembly debated it. The outcome, when it came, sided with the umbral court's position by a margin of 5-2, with one formal statement from the presiding elder that the ruling set a precedent. The purpose of the blood law was the protection of court interests, not the exclusion of any particular category of being. Morrigan accepted the ruling in public and said nothing further. She was not gone. Olivia understood that. People like Morrigan didn't disappear, they reorganized. But the legal ground had been closed under her primary strategy, and the protected status code meant that direct action against Olivia was now explicitly subject to court law. It wasn't peace, it was a stable stalemate, and in politics, Olivia had learned, a stable stalemate could last long enough to become something else. 3 months after the binding, on an evening when the court was quiet and the library was full of firelight, and Gerald was asleep in his chair, and the city hummed somewhere above them, Casimir put down the document he was reading and said her name. She looked up. There is something I want to tell you, he said, and his voice was different, not the public voice, not the court voice, but the one she heard when it was just the 2 of them, and the door was closed. Okay, she said. I am in love with you, he said. Not as a declaration designed for effect, not carefully phrased to protect himself. Just directly, the way you say something you have been certain about for long enough that the saying of it is simply honesty. I am aware we have known each other only a short time by any standard, and a very short time by mine. I am also aware that I said I wanted to know you, and I stand by that. I am not finished knowing you, I will not be for a long time. But what I feel is not uncertainty or approximation. It is this. He looked at her steadily. She set her book down. She looked at him across the table. She thought about all the versions of this moment she had imagined in her life. The dramatic ones, the cinematic ones, the ones that arrived with music and perfect lighting. And she thought about how this one was better than any of them, because it was quiet and honest, and came from someone who had spent 300 years being careful and was being unguarded with her now. I'm in love with you too, she said. I've been watching it happen to myself for weeks and trying to be sensible about it. And, he said, sensible lost, she said. Somewhere around the time you crouched down to make friends with my cat. He rose from his chair and came around the table and sat beside her, and she turned toward him. And for the first time he put his hand against her face with a gentleness that seemed almost at odds with everything he was. 3 centuries of absolute authority and political iron, and the particular controlled power of something very old and very certain. And she leaned into it, because it was the most natural thing she had done in months. "There are still things I need to tell you," he said. "Things about what the binding means long-term, choices you'll need to make eventually. About the transition, if you want it, or the extended life without it. I do not want to rush any of it. I know," she said. "I'm not in a rush." "We have time," he said, and said it like a gift. Like time was the most extraordinary thing he could offer her, and he was aware of that, and meant to give it. "We have time," she agreed. He kissed her with the same care he brought to everything, deliberate, genuine, unhurried. And she felt the binding between them pulse once with warmth, and the fire crackled, and Gerald snored, and somewhere above them the city went on with all of its noise and motion and ordinary human life. The formal court recognition came at the winter gathering, which was the umbral court's version of an annual convening. Every senior member, every significant alliance, the full weight of court ceremony and old-world protocol. Olivia stood at the high table beside Casimir in deep winter blue, her hair done in the style that Isolde had taught her, which incorporated silver pins that were, Isolde had noted with amusement, traditional for a consort who has survived their first political season. The court acknowledged her, properly and formally, and without the eruption of that first night, and she felt the difference between being presented and being recognized. Councillor Aldrich approached her after the formal session, which she had not expected. He stood in front of her with the expression of someone who has revised their position and is not entirely comfortable with the revision. "You argued the Pale Assembly case well," he said. "Thank you," she said, waiting. "The protected status measure was more broadly useful than I initially credited," he said. "The Eastern Reaches Court has been asking about a similar provision for their human-adjacent alliances." "I'm aware," she said. "I've been in correspondence with their liaison." Aldrich looked at her for a moment. "You have been doing this for 3 months," he said. "You are conducting foreign correspondence already." "I'm doing the job," she said. He was quiet for a moment longer. Then, stiffly but genuinely, he said, "The court is better served by your presence than I believed it would be. That is my formal statement, and I will make it before the council if it is useful." "It might be useful," she said, Ed. "I'll let you know." He inclined his head and withdrew, and Olivia turned to find Casimir beside her, having appeared with his customary absence of transit. "Aldrich just complimented me," she said. "I heard," he said. "Is that the vampire equivalent of a miracle?" "It is close," he said, and took her hand. Darian appeared on her other side, grinning, the youngest of them, still young enough to grin freely. "I told Isolde you'd have him eating out of your hand by winter. She owes me a very old book." "I didn't do it on purpose," Olivia said. "That's the most effective way," Darian said cheerfully, and drifted back into the crowd. Isolde appeared briefly, pressed a glass of champagne into Olivia's hand, murmured "well survived," and disappeared again in the direction of the library. Casimir watched her go with the expression of someone observing a world that has realigned in a direction he had not previously thought possible. "This is your court now," he told Olivia. "Do you understand that? Not half of it, not the parts they'll allow you. It's yours." "I know," she said. "I'm still learning it." "I know," he said. "I'll be here the whole time." She looked at him, white-haired, silver-eyed, extraordinary and ancient and entirely, genuinely hers, and felt the warmth of everything they had built in 3 months running through her like sunlight, like the binding, like the particular aliveness of being exactly where you are supposed to be. "Casimir," she said, "yes, I want the full story, all of it. However long it takes." She held his gaze. The transition, the extended life, the courts, the politics, the centuries of it. "I want all of it." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something in his eyes that she suspected she was the first person in a very long time to be shown. Something that looked like a door opening from the inside. "Then you'll have it," he said. "Every year of it. Every century if you want that too." "I think I do," she said. The winter gathering went on around them, 40 vampires in their finery, navigating the ancient dance of court and alliance and old blood. The candelabras burned. The great hall echoed with conversation in 4 languages. Somewhere in the library, Gerald was asleep in a velvet chair that had survived 2 world wars, and Isolde had left him a small blanket without acknowledging she'd done so. Olivia stood with her hand in Casimir's and watched the court that was hers now. Genuinely hers, hard-won and legally qualified, and slowly, genuinely accepting her, and thought about Brooklyn and the coffee shop and the agency and the waitressing shift she had almost not taken because she had been tired, because the city had been heavy, because she had not known that the door she was about to walk through would open onto a staircase leading down into something so large and so strange and so entirely, unexpectedly right. She thought about Priya, who she still called twice a week, who had been told simply that Olivia had taken a job she hadn't expected and was living somewhere new, and was genuinely and truthfully happy. Priya, who had said, "You sound different," and Olivia had said, "I am different," and Priya had said, "Good different," and Olivia had said, "The best kind." She thought about her studio apartment in Brooklyn, which she still had, which still held Gerald's old blanket, and her library books and the dead plant she'd finally thrown away. She went back sometimes on her own to sit in the quiet of it and remember who she had been before. She didn't go because she wanted to go back. She went because the person she'd been before was part of who she was now, and she didn't want to forget her. The woman who had taken the shift because she needed the money. The woman who had stood in the corner and looked back. She was glad she'd looked back. Morrigan sent a formal correspondence to the Umbral Court in the new year. Not a challenge, not a legal action, but a request for a meeting. Olivia read the letter and saw what it was, a repositioning. Morrigan, having exhausted her primary strategies, was calculating that negotiating with the existing order was more profitable than continuing to fight it. It wasn't friendship, it wasn't concession. It was pragmatism, and Olivia respected pragmatism even when she didn't particularly like its source. She brought it to Casimir with a note of her own recommendations, and he read both with the same careful attention he gave to everything, and then he looked at her and said, "You want to meet with her?" "I want to hear what she actually wants," Olivia said. "If she's repositioning, it means there's something she wants from the Umbral Court that she can't get through opposition. Finding out what it is gives us something to work with." "She sent people to frighten you," he said, and his tone had a particular quality she recognized as the one that meant he had not forgotten, and was not inclined to treat it as resolved. "She did," Olivia said. "And it's in the record, and she knows it's in the record, and she knows that I know. That's part of why she's repositioning. She's making a calculation about what's more valuable, ongoing hostility or a working relationship. And if her calculation is wrong, then we let her be wrong," she said. "We meet with her, we hear what she wants, and if her terms aren't acceptable, we say so. But I'm not going to govern out of what she did 6 months ago forever. That's not how I want to run this." He looked at her for a long, considering moment. "No," he said finally. "It isn't, is it?" He picked up the letter, set the meeting. The meeting with Morrigan was, in the end, a careful and professionally formal negotiation about access to certain court archives that the Umbral Court held, and that Morrigan's house had a legitimate historical claim to. It lasted 3 hours. Morrigan was exactly as cold and precise and aristocratically formidable as Olivia had expected her to be, and Olivia was exactly as prepared and calm and specific in return. They did not like each other. They were both entirely clear about that. But by the end of it, they had reached an agreement that gave Morrigan's house limited archive access under supervised conditions, and gave the Umbral Court a formal acknowledgement that the Pale Assembly ruling would not be challenged further. It was not friendship. It was a closed chapter, and closed chapters were what allowed you to write the next one. Afterwards, when Morrigan had left with her 2 attendants and the room had settled back to its normal register, Casimir looked at Olivia with the particular expression she had come to love best, the one that was warm and private and entirely uncalculated. "She wasn't what you expected?" he asked. "She was exactly what I expected," Olivia said. "But expectations can be worked with." "You are going to be a formidable queen," he said. "I already am," she said simply, and he laughed. That real, startled, brilliant laugh that she had been collecting since the first time she heard it. On a night in early spring, when the world above them was thawing, and the underground halls of the umbral court had taken on a warmth that felt like the seasons seeping through stone, Casimir took her to a part of the estate she hadn't seen. A long gallery that opened at one end onto a skylight, set into the Manhattan street above, covered by a grate and angled precisely to capture the reflected glow of the city rather than direct light. At night it filled with the orange and gold of street lamps and neon and the particular luminescence of a city that never fully goes dark. "I come here sometimes," he said, "when I miss daylight." She looked at him. "Do you? Miss it?" "Less than I expected to," he said. "There is a version of the world that is only visible at night. I have come to prefer it." He looked up at the reflected light. "But there are moments." She stood beside him and looked up at the amber glow above them, this underground city looking up at the city above, two worlds occupying the same space without awareness of each other, and she thought, "This is what I live in now. Two worlds. Both of them real, both of them mine." "I'll tell you about the daylight," she said, "whenever you want. What it looks like, what it feels like. I'll be your daylight correspondent." He looked at her. "That is the kindest thing anyone has offered me," he said, and it was said in the quiet voice, the real one, and it meant something large. "I know," she said, and took his hand. They stood in the gallery for a long time, looking up at the reflected city, and the warmth between them was the warmth of something built carefully and tested, honestly, and found to be, against all probability, exactly as real as it had felt from the beginning. The world above kept turning. The court below went on with its ancient rhythms, its old blood laws, its centuries of power and protocol. Somewhere in the library, Gerald occupied a velvet chair with imperial confidence. Isolde was annotating a manuscript. Darian was probably causing some kind of minor incident. Aldrich was, in his own stiff and gradual way, adjusting. And in the gallery, the king of the umbral court and the human girl from Brooklyn stood together in the amber glow of a city that didn't know they existed, and were, in all the ways that matter and that last, entirely and completely home.